Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to yet another edition of the Halal Food Podcast. Today we've got the pleasure of bringing in our brother Muhammad, who is here to clarify a few things about our previous podcast with a gentleman called Asalat. Asalat works for an organization called Eyes on Animals. He came in the last time we had discussions and he made some claims, so which I'm going to throw to Brother Muhammad to just address. And we also look at Quran chapter 5, verse 3 in greater detail so that our listeners and viewers will benefit, inshallah, from our discussions. So without much ado, I invite Brother Muhammad to introduce himself before we start.
Jazakallahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, my name is Mohammed Mizanur Rahman. I usually go by the nickname Abu Bara. I have studied Islam for over 20 years now, alongside a number of students of Sheikh Mohammed in the UK and in Lebanon, as well as having a bachelor's degree in Islamic studies. I have looked quite in depth at this topic before. I remember the scandals that came about before when HMC, as one of the bodies, started to come out and reveal a lot more information about what's happening with the slaughter situation in the UK. So I'm familiar with the situation in the UK quite well as well.
Alhamdulillah, you are the right person to sort of have an interaction with to discuss this thing. So my first question, one of the things that Brother Asalat, the gentleman from Eyes on Animals, he's also a Turkish but based in Germany. One of the things he said was that if an animal dies before slaughter, so he gave an example where if you know the cause of death of an animal, that if he's got a farm and he goes home, come back to the farm and sees that an animal is strangled, he knows the cause of the strangulation. He knows that the animal has died as a result of the strangulation. He can cut the neck and still consume it. According to him, that is acceptable as halal. Can you just throw some light on dead animals being halal?
Yes, so in the verse, sort of matter, verse 3, this matter is very clearly explained. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade al-mayta, the mayta is described as dead animals, dead meat, and I saw the podcast, he mentioned it as being carrion. Now, carrion you can define in many ways, but the way the Sharia works is the language is subjective not only to the people and the usage of the people that use it in the time of the Arabs before the Quran was revealed, but also by the definitions laid down by the Quran. So when Allah reveals certain words, Allah redefines words. So this has been mentioned, that this verse in fact came to address the understanding of the Arabs from Jahiliyyah about what is considered to be dead meat, mayta. So in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, on this verse, on Surah Ma'idah verse 3, he mentions very explicitly addressing this exact point. He says, وَكَانَتِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةُ تَأْكُلُ الْمُتَرَدِّي وَلَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْتَقِدْ مَيْتَةً إِلَّا مَا مَاتَ بِالْوَجْعِ وَنَحْوِ. So he said, in the time of Jahiliyyah, they used to eat the animals, and mentioned al-mutaraddi, the animal that's fallen and died from a long fall.
Okay. And
they never used to believe that this was mayta, or dead meat, except if it died but from hunger or something similar, دون سبب يعرف, without a cause or a reason that they knew about. This is how the Arabs in Jahiliyyah used to define mayta, the dead meat, because they also don't eat carrion. Nobody will eat rotting flesh. Yeah, so they did not eat mayta, but they didn't consider animals which they knew the root cause of its death, such as a fall or strangulation or drowning. They didn't consider that to be mayta. And then he continues, he said, فَأَمَّا هَذِهِ الْأَسْبَابِ فَكَانَتْ عِنْدَهَا كَالذَّكَاةِ. And they used to consider these causes of death to be a form of zakat, a form of purification. The way Brother Asad has mentioned in his podcast, that any form of completion of the death, he considered that to be a form of completion or zakat or purification. But then he continues, Imam al-Qurtubi said, فَحَصَّرَ الشَّرْعِ, that the Sharia has specified specifically as zakat, the purification or the slaughter, as being في صفة مخصوصة على ما يأتي بيانها, upon a very specific description that Allah has specified in the text. وَبَقِيَتْ هَذِهِ كُلُّهَا مَيْتَةٌ, and everything besides that is considered to be maytah according to the Sharia. وَهَذَا كُلُّهُ مِنَ الْمُحْكَمِ الْمُتَّفَقُ عَلَيْهِ, and this is from the clear-cut explicit matters from this verse, al-muttafaq alayh, which means it is agreed upon among all Muslims.
Okay.
In fact, there's another statement from Imam Tabari in Tafsir al-Tabari on the same verse. He narrated the ijma' on this matter as well. Narrated from Abu Umar, it said, وقال Abu Umar قد أجمعوا في المريضة, regarding the sick animal. He said it has this consensus upon that. التي لا ترجى حياتها أن ذبحها زكاة لها إذا كانت فيها الحياة. He said that there's a consensus that if the sick animal for whom there is no chance of survival, is definitely going to die, slaughtering it is zakat for it, it is purification for it, as long as it still has life. إذا كانت فيها الحياة في حين ذبحها, at the time of slaughter. And he said وعلم ذلك منها بما ذكروا من حركة يدها أو رجلها أو ذنبها أو نحو ذلك. And said, and it's known whether it still has life in it from whether it is still moving. He said if it's moving its arm or its leg or its limbs or something similar to that. He said وأجمعوا أنها إذا صارت في حال النزع ولم تحرك يدا ولا رجلا أنه لا زكاة فيها. And he said, and there's consensus also that if it does not continue, if it does not move, it no longer moves any of its limbs, his arms or its legs, then there is no way for you to purify it. There's no way to slaughter it for it to become halal. And there's more than that as well. In fact, on this ayah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the istithna, the exception, to say except if you purify it. Imam al-Tabari narrates that there are two different opinions about what this means. One is the opinion which says, and there is no third opinion. The first opinion is that all of these items that we mentioned, the animal that's been beaten to death, or the one that falls from a long height, or the one that's been gored by horns, etc. That all of these types of animals, apart from the pork, if they are injured in this way, but you reach it and slaughter it while it's still alive before its death, then it is halal. But otherwise, it is not halal. I'm going to mention some of those quotes as well that clarify that further. The second opinion, however, is that actually this exception does not refer to making these halal. So Imam Malik, for example, believed that if an animal has deadly wounds from goring or falling or beating to the head, even if you slaughter it before death, is not halal. He said that what is mentioned here, so this opinion is that, because istithna, the word illa in Arabic, can be to make an exception for part of the whole. It can also mean a distinction between two very different things. So like in Arabic, you can say a group of men, illa, except for the horse. And that does not mean the horse is man. It means that the horse is not part of the men. So there are many statements in the Quran where Allah uses language like this. Both of them linguistically are correct. So Imam Malik took the position that what the verse is saying, that all of these types of animal and food are haram, from the dead meat to the blood to the pork to that which is slaughtered for other than Allah, and the stunned meat or the gored meat, the ones that were gored by horns or one who falls from a height. All of these are haram. The only thing is halal is that which you slaughter in the normal way. So this is the opinion of Imam Malik. He separates it completely. There is no opinion at all that the animal which dies through any means before you're able to slaughter, there's no opinion in the history of Islamic scholarship that permits that and consider that to be halal. And what we have to understand is that we cannot just look at the verse of the Quran in Arabic or any other language without understanding the context, because these were revealed to people. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions, he addressed them. So if they understood it, their understanding is the one intended by Allah. Otherwise, we're accusing Allah of misleading the Prophet and his companions themselves. So the way they understood it is what is vital. So if we look to Ibn Abbas,
No.
And in fact, a number of companions, Qatada, Ibn Abbas, as well as Tabi'een, such as Shi'bi as well, they mentioned very specifically
Yeah.
that it must be when they are alive. In one hadith in Tafsir al-Tabari is mentioned, mentioned the word وَفِيهِ الروح. He said that if okay, so let me give you the full quote, inshallah. So he said, يقول هذا حرام. He said these things, these meats are haram. لأن ناسا من العرب كانوا يأكلون ولا يعدون ميتا. Because from the time of Jahiliyyah, the Arabs, they used to eat these types of meat. This one specifically talking about the one which is gored by horns, for example, and they did not consider it to be meita. إنما يعدون الميت الذي يموت من الوجع, and they only used to consider what is the dead meat from what died of hunger. This is from a different quote, not from the previous one. فحرمه الله عليهم. So Allah forbade this for them with this verse. إلا ما ذكروا اسم الله عليه وَدْرُكُوا ذكاته وفيه الروح. Except for that which the name of Allah has been mentioned, and while you reach it, while it still has its soul.
Okay. Brother Muhammad, before you continue, just stop there, please. I want to. One of the arguments he mentioned was that there is nowhere in the Quran or Hadith or any of the interpretation that says when an animal is strangled, when an animal died through goring horns or through a fall, you have to slaughter it before it dies. All he says is you have to slaughter it. It doesn't say you have to slaughter it before it dies. So I want you to emphasize on that. So please continue. But I want you to emphasize that it says the animal should be alive at the point of slaughter.
Yes, absolutely it does. And in fact, there is hadith from a number of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ answering this very question. So if I give you one example.
Yeah.
This is in Surah Tafsir al-Qurtubi on the verse. Is narrated there with the full isnad in there as well. He mentioned, okay, this is a statement from the ulama, the consensus among the ulama, that he said كل ما أدرك ذكاته من المذكورات وفيه حياة. He said it only refers to permitting the animal which is being slaughtered while it still has life, hayat. Another example, going back to the companions, I'm looking for a specific quote where it's been mentioned in Bukhari and in Fath al-Bari from Ibn Hajar, an explanation of this, and also in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he spoke about the situation where an animal has been killed from hunting. And he mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you are hunting with your dog, with a hunting dog, and you find your dog with another dog carrying the bird or the animal that you've hunted, then you cannot eat it. And this is because of the doubt caused, that you're not sure whether it's your dog that killed it or the other dog that killed it. In another hadith, he mentioned, if you shoot a bird and the bird falls into water, you cannot eat it because there's a doubt whether it was your arrow or whether it was the water, the drowning, that killed it. So these things completely clarify where there's any doubt at all about whether your slaughtering or hunting is the cause of the death or any other cause beside that, that becomes prohibited. And there's a consensus among the scholars that the original rules for all meats, slaughtered or unslaughtered, is that it is haram until it is certain or clear that it was slaughtered or hunted either by a Muslim or somebody from the people of the book. Similarly, there are in Kitab al-Mughni, is also been narrated a number of hadith where it mentions examples of 2 arrows. So if you are hunting and there happens to be a mushrik that was also hunting, and both of your arrows hit an animal and you find the animals to be dead, then you are not allowed to eat that meat because you don't know whether it was your arrow or the arrow of the mushrik that killed it, which would mean that you cannot be certain that it was halal. So all of these clarify that the only way that it can be halal is if the cause of death was the hand of a Muslim or somebody from the people of the book through either the proper slaughter or through hunting. Any other method is not allowed, or any accidental death is not allowed. Also, there's a case where Ibn Abbas was consulted about an animal that that was hunted but then fell down,
Yeah.
and he said, and he was found dead. He said, do not eat it. And also there's a clarification where the question was asked to scholars from the Tabi'een, and I'm just trying to find that specific quote,
Okay.
where they asked him, how will we know if we can eat it, if it can be purified? And he said that you will know it because its eye is still moving or its limbs are still moving. That is how you know that you can still slaughter. And if it stops that, that means it's dead and you can no longer slaughter. It can no longer be halal. So from all of these different quotes and all of these different references, the scholars from every single school of thought were in agreement that any animal that is dead at the point of slaughtering, that slaughtering does not count and it will never be considered to be halal, even if it was not rotting or anything like that, even if it was fresh. The moment it stops having signs of life, it can no longer be slaughtered.
Thank you very much, Brother Muhammad. This is a very important topic that is affecting a lot of Muslims, either in Europe or in most of the industrialized world. Because if you look at the developing countries like Africa, countries in Africa, or even in Pakistan, most animals are slaughtered without stunning or without any secondary intervention that could lead to the death of the animal. And I'm happy you have just explained all these things regarding Maita. Now, what the brother was saying, and you've just mentioned it, he said that the emphasis is on food safety. As long as the animal is not rotting, as long as the animal is slaughtered even after death, the animal should be okay. I understand food safety is very important in Islam because of halal and tayyib, because tayyib is all about food safety. So thank you very much for clarifying that. The other thing I wanted to say is in most abattoirs in Europe and in America, animals are slaughtered after what we call gas stunning or modified atmosphere stunning, where animals are exposed to a gas. The gas essentially kills them, but when they exit from the gas chamber, the necks are then cut. When you cut the neck, you can see the animal bleeding. You may not see any movement in the animal because the animal is dead. What would be your opinion on that? If the cause of death you have caused it because you have exposed the animal to a gas, it's not about the animal falling or the animal being gored by horns, but you have caused the death by exposing it to gas before bleeding it. In that instance, can we say it's halal or that is still not halal?
Okay, so from two perspectives, I want to discuss this. First of all, the verse in Surah Ma'idah, verse 3, also mentions the animal that died from suffocation or strangling. Similarly, with drowning is under the same verse. So gas suffocation can be considered to be the same type of death. So it would be considered to be made a dead animal and prohibited, and the slaughter after death would not be valid in order to make it halal. So this would be prohibited. So that is the first thing. The second thing is, and you touched on it there as well, the methods that people are using, and they're using this verse to say that if we can just slaughter the animal before it dies after stunning or suffocation or anything else, that is not the intent of the verse. The verse was talking about a situation where an animal died or was suffered a deadly wound through some means, and you killed it, you slaughtered it before it passed away. It was not intended as a permission for you to beat an animal or to suffocate an animal or strangle it. That is considered to be a form of torture. And torturing the animal is prohibited in Islam, and that is known by necessity, and it cannot be part of our industry that we make a business out of torturing thousands of chickens and animals an hour just to speed up the process of slaughter. That cannot be permitted. So that would be considered a sin, even if you were able to slaughter it before its final breath, if you like. So from my perspective, I do not believe that we as a Muslim community should be cooperating with and doing business with slaughterhouses that engage in this clearly prohibited practice, even if they're able to slaughter it before it passes away. So it's not just the perspective of, okay, it's the suffocation and the stunning is something that makes the meat haram. The very practice of deliberately making these animals suffer this type of trauma is itself a sin and haram act, even if the meat, it has question over it, whether people might debate about if it's halal or haram or not. We should not be engaging in that in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Muhammad. Another thing you've just mentioned is the fact that Islam holds animal welfare in high regard, because if you are warning, if Allah is warning us, or if there are practices in Hadith that is warning us that, look, we should respect the welfare of animals, and we intentionally expose them to any abuse, then on the day of judgment we will be accountable for that. Now, the other question I've got is, we talked about gas stunning. There is a gas called carbon dioxide, and we know that from research that carbon, when animals are exposed to carbon dioxide, it is aversive. It is not good for their welfare. Many researchers have reported this. What advice have you got to halal certification bodies, to Muslim abattoirs, or to butchers? Because it is our butchers, the Muslim butchers, who go in and buy these products. What advice have you got for them in trying to buy products from animals, from processes that expose animals to welfare compromises?
So my advice to them is that your relationship with animals is part of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No.
Allah has put responsibility on the hands of Muslims, or of people in general in this earth, to look after the animals and the environment around us. And that includes to treat them well. So the Prophet ﷺ narrated about a cat that was tortured by its owner. And by the torture mentioned in this hadith is just that it was held imprisoned and was not allowed to go out to hunt, nor was it fed. And Allah promised to punish the owner of that with hellfire as a result. Any form of cruelty to an animal is something we are accountable for. It's not just a question of business or trade or profit or the bottom line. This is a matter of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and accountability. We will have to answer for every single animal that suffers at our hands on the day of judgment. And we will have to deal and face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer it. So that is a responsibility, not just for the abattoirs, but those who do business with those abattoirs, and for us as consumers as well. We need to be careful what we consume and who we spend our money with, because we are also ultimately supporting that the torture of those animals in that process. So it's not something which is a secular matter. This is a matter which is part and at the heart of our own deen and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Once again, thank you very much, brother Muhammad. I've got one last question for you. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah uses the word maita is used. Now, brother Asalat was saying when maita is used, it actually means decaying animal. It doesn't mean dead animal. From what you've explained, you are saying it means dead animals, and he's saying it means decaying or rotten, or animals that are in a state of being rotten. Have you got any evidence to say, look, maita actually means death? It's got nothing to, well, it could mean decaying because a dead animal that has decayed, but does it specifically mean the animal has decayed?
Well, I mean, from the root of the Arabic is literally from the word maut. So any animal which is dead is considered to be maita or mayyit, and this is from the grammatical root of the verb. It's the same in meaning. Now, what additional meanings it carries and specific meanings that it that defines it can depend on a number of things. Okay. Language is just one of those. So when the Sharia redefines a word in the Arabic language, many words in the Quran have been redefined by Islam and the Sharia. So for example, simple words like salah. Salah means supplication, dua. But in the Quran, in the Sharia, it means specifically something we do 5 times a day with ruku and sujood. You cannot be done in any other way. Zakat, it means investment in Arabic, but in the Sharia, it means a particular specific amount of obligatory spending on charity to specific categories of people, 2.5% of wealth, all of that you cannot get from language. It comes from the Sharia. So when Allah has revealed many different verses, very specifically defining what is considered to be halal slaughter, and he declared everything else to be haram meat, in either meta or slaughtered for other than Allah. And so these are the definitions that we have to use, and that is the definition understood by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah has made their understanding what is a binding argument, irrefutable argument for us to follow. More than that, if you look to another verse in Surah An'am, verse 121, this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes what happened when Allah revealed these verses, which specifically spoke about animals which were not slaughtered by Muslims or people of the book.
Yeah.
In other words, died in any other way. Some of the mushrikeen tried to debate with the Muslims about this, and they said to them that ultimately Allah gives life, takes life. So how is it that you eat what you slaughter with your own hand, but you do not eat that which is slaughtered by Allah, in other words, killed in any other way or killed naturally?
Yeah.
And so this argument was presented to the Muslims, and Allah revealed in the Quran that those arguments were inspired by the shaitan. And he said, if you obey them in this belief, accepting that this is halal, the dead, the non-slaughtered meat, the one that was not slaughtered by the hands of the Muslims or the people of the book, then you become from the mushrikeen yourself. You by obeying them instead of obeying Allah, by accepting their rulings and laws instead of Allah, you become like them. And that was specifically on the matter of saying, the Muslims say what we slaughter by a hand is edible and everything else is meta. And they are saying, no, why can't you eat the other animals that have fallen from a headlong fall or been gored by horns, etc.? Because the mushrikeen still used to eat those foods, and they didn't consider that to be carrion or meta, because they also didn't eat meta. And that was the debate that was taking place, and Allah clarified it for us in these verses.
Thank you very much, Brother Muhammad. Maybe in the future, inshallah, if I need clarification from any matter again, I will invite you. But I would like on behalf of my listeners and viewers, I would like to say a big thank you for sparing some time to come on the podcast. Okay, assalamu alaikum.